The station had no name that anyone trusted. It was called different things depending on who you asked. Transit 9, the quiet ring, that place you don't stay too long. And Sev had learned early that when a place had too many names, it usually meant no one wanted to claim it. He stepped off the docking corridor into a long, dim concourse where the air smelled faintly of sterilized metal and something sweet that pretended to be fruit. A maintenance drone drifted past him at shoulder height, paused as if reconsidering its purpose in life, then continued on with a small, defeated hum. Sev adjusted the strap of his worn satchel and glanced up at the curved glass of the outer ring. Beyond it, a dying star burned in quiet collapse, its light stretched thin like a memory that refused to fade. The sight drew a few scattered travelers to the observation deck, though most of them looked only briefly before returning to their own concerns. Stars died all the time. People were less consistent. He told himself he was only passing through. He had cargo to deliver 2 systems over and a schedule that had already begun to resent him. Stopping here was inefficient. Stopping here was unnecessary. Naturally, he stopped. The observation deck was quieter than the rest of the station, as if sound itself had decided to be polite. A row of empty seats curved along the glass, and at the far end, someone sat alone. Sev noticed her without meaning to, the way you notice a pattern that doesn't quite fit. At first glance, she looked human, still, composed, her posture relaxed in a way that suggested she had nowhere else she needed to be. Then she turned her head slightly, and the difference revealed itself in the gentle sweep of her ears, longer than they should have been, angled back like a subtle defiance of symmetry. Sev hesitated for a fraction of a second, then shrugged to himself. He had spoken to stranger people in stranger places. Once he had shared a meal with a diplomat who communicated entirely through blinking lights and passive aggression. This would be easier. He walked over, careful not to sound like he was trying too hard not to make noise, and stopped a respectful distance away. "If that star collapses any slower," he said, nodding toward the glass, "I might have to come back next year just to see if it's finished." She glanced at him, her expression shifting in a way that wasn't quite amusement, but wasn't indifference either. "You assume it intends to finish?" "That's optimistic," Sev replied. "I've met processes with less commitment." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just deliberate. She studied him briefly, as if deciding whether he was worth the effort of continued conversation. Sev resisted the urge to make a second joke immediately, which for him counted as remarkable restraint. "You're not from here," she said. Sev let out a quiet laugh. "I'm not from most places. It's a growing trend." That at least earned a faint smile. It wasn't wide or dramatic, just enough to suggest that somewhere beneath her composure, she found the situation mildly entertaining. He sat down beside her, leaving enough space to respect whatever invisible boundaries she might have. For a moment, they both looked out at the star. Its light flickered faintly, as if it were considering giving up entirely, but hadn't quite committed to the idea. "I used to think stars were permanent," Sev said after a while. "Then I learned they're just very slow at changing their minds." "And now?" she asked. "Now I think they're dramatic," he said. "All that burning, just to make a point." She tilted her head slightly, considering that. "What point do you think it's making?" Sev gestured vaguely toward the glass. "Probably something profound about existence. Or maybe it just wants attention. Hard to tell with stars." This time her smile lingered a little longer. It changed her face in a way Sev couldn't quite define, softening something that had seemed deliberately held in place. They spoke after that without any clear direction, their conversation drifting from one topic to another with the ease of people who had no reason to impress each other. Trade routes, the questionable logic of station architecture, the strange habits of travelers who insisted on bringing plants into zero-gravity environments as if gravity itself might feel left out. At one point, Sev found himself explaining how he had once lost a shipment because he trusted a navigation AI that described itself as emotionally invested in his success. "And was it?" she asked. "It was emotionally invested in being right," Sev said, which turned out to be a different goal entirely. She laughed then, quietly but genuinely, and the sound seemed to settle into the space between them like something that belonged there. Time passed without announcing itself. The star dimmed fractionally. The station lights adjusted to compensate, and somewhere in the distance a docking alarm chimed with polite urgency. Sev glanced at the time display on his wrist and made a face. "I should go," he said, though he didn't immediately stand. She nodded, as if she had expected that from the beginning. He hesitated, searching for something to say that wouldn't sound like an ending. Instead, what came out was something else entirely. "We should meet here again," he said, gesturing lightly around them. "Same place, same view." She looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. "In 21 years, he added, because the number felt arbitrary enough to be safe. It was meant to be a joke. He even smiled like it was one. She didn't laugh. She only smiled, slow and quiet, as if the words had settled somewhere deeper than he intended. "All right," she said. Sev nodded, satisfied with the absurdity of it, and finally stood. "Good," he said. "That gives me time to be fashionably late." He turned and walked away, already dismissing the promise as something that would dissolve the moment he left the station. Behind him, the dying star flickered once more, and she remained where she was, watching it as if time had just begun to matter. Sev told himself he forgot her name. This was technically true, mostly because he had never asked for it. It was a convenient kind of forgetfulness, the sort that required no effort to maintain. Names made things real. Names had a way of lingering, of attaching themselves to memory like stubborn particles that refused to be shaken loose. What he remembered instead was less precise and far more inconvenient. The way she had listened, the quiet curve of her smile, the faint angle of her ears that had marked her as something other than human without making her seem distant. He left the station with the casual certainty of someone who believed in his own forward motion. His ship, if it could be called that without offending more respectable vessels, greeted him with a low mechanical complaint as he boarded. The onboard system flickered to life. "Welcome back," it said, in a tone that suggested mild disappointment. "You are 12 minutes behind your optimal departure window." "I was busy," Sev replied, dropping into the pilot's seat. "You were stationary," the system corrected. "Sensors indicate you spent approximately—" "I was busy being stationary," Sev said. "It's a nuanced activity." There was a brief pause, as if the system were considering whether to argue further or simply log the statement as a sign of declining cognitive function. "Departure sequence initiated," it said finally, choosing diplomacy. The station receded behind him, shrinking into a distant ring of light. Sev didn't look back immediately. He adjusted controls, checked his route, pretended that his attention was entirely consumed by the practical demands of travel. When he did glance at the rear display, the observation deck was already lost in the station's silhouette. "Good," he muttered to himself. "That makes it easier." "Easier for what?" the system asked. "For not developing unnecessary habits," Sev said. "You have 17 documented habits that serve no practical purpose," the system replied. "Would you like me to list them?" "No," Sev said quickly. "Let's preserve some mystery." The ship slipped into transit, stars stretching into elongated threads before dissolving into the muted geometry of faster-than-light travel. Time became less distinct there, measured more by routine than by any external reference. Sev occupied himself with small tasks, maintenance checks, minor recalibrations, a brief and unsuccessful attempt to improve the ship's coffee synthesis algorithm. "It tastes like regret," he informed the system after the first sip. "That is within acceptable parameters," the system replied. Sev stared at the cup. "You're not helping." Days passed, or something close enough to days that Sev didn't argue with the distinction. He moved from one contract to another, one station to the next, each place blending into the familiar pattern of transient existence. Faces came and went. Conversations started and ended without consequence. It was a life defined by motion, and for the most part, it suited him, except for the moments when it didn't. It started subtly, a thought that surfaced without invitation while he was negotiating a delivery rate, a brief distraction as he watched a star field from a different observation window. The memory didn't arrive fully formed. It came in fragments, incomplete and oddly persistent. The way she had tilted her head when considering a question, the fact that she hadn't laughed at his joke, but hadn't dismissed it either. Statistically speaking, the system said one evening, you have been less efficient in your decision-making over the past 72 hours. That sounds like a very polite way of saying I've been distracted, Sev replied. That is because I am programmed to be polite, the system said. Also, you have been distracted. Sev leaned back in his seat, staring at the faint glow of the control panel. I met someone, he said, as if explaining it might reduce its significance. That is not an uncommon occurrence, the system replied. No, but this one was... He trailed off, searching for a word that didn't feel excessive. Inconvenient, the system suggested. Sev considered that. Yes, he said. Exactly. Would you like to forget them? The system asked. I can recommend several cognitive techniques, or if you prefer, there are licensed memory editing services available in... I don't need to erase anything, Sev interrupted. It was just a conversation. A conversation that has occupied approximately 12% of your active thought processes since departure, the system noted. Sev frowned. You're making that up. I do not make things up, the system said. I quantify them. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Fine. It was a good conversation. That is still within normal parameters, the system replied. However, the persistence of your attention suggests an anomaly. Sev laughed quietly. An anomaly, he repeated. That sounds serious. Would you prefer I describe it as a minor but statistically significant deviation? The system asked. No, anomaly is fine, Sev said. It makes me sound more interesting. The ship hummed softly around him, its systems continuing their quiet work. Outside, the artificial distortion of transit concealed the stars entirely, leaving only the steady illusion of movement. She agreed to meet me again, Sev said after a moment. The system paused. That implies a future interaction. In 21 years, Sev added. There was a longer pause this time. I see, the system said finally. And you consider this a binding agreement? Sev smiled faintly. No, he said. I consider it a joke. The system processed that. Then why are you thinking about it? Sev didn't answer immediately. He watched the empty distortion ahead of them, as if expecting it to reveal something it had no intention of showing. Because, he said slowly, she didn't treat it like one. The system had no immediate response to that. For once, it seemed to recognize that not every variable could be reduced to data. Sev exhaled softly, shaking his head. It doesn't matter, he said. 21 years is a long time. Statistically, the system replied, it is also a measurable one. Sev smirked. You really know how to ruin a good dismissal. That is also within acceptable parameters, the system said. Sev leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. The thought lingered anyway, quiet and persistent, like the fading light of a distant star that refused to disappear completely. The first time Ariel was asked if she intended to rule, she was still young enough to find the question amusing. I intend to survive the meeting, she had replied, glancing at the circle of elders who watched her as though she were both a solution and a problem. After that, I will consider ambition. It was not the answer they expected, which was precisely why it worked. Among the Tavari, expectations were a currency more valuable than power itself. To break them without appearing to do so was an art, and Ariel had always possessed an unsettling instinct for it. Years passed in a way that did not resemble the passage of time so much as its accumulation. Decisions layered over decisions. Alliances formed not from trust but from necessity. And beneath it all, the constant awareness that every word spoken in the meridian carried weight beyond its surface. She learned quickly, not because she was eager but because hesitation was expensive. Your silence is being interpreted as uncertainty, her advisor told her during one particularly long council session. Ariel rested her chin lightly against her fingers, considering the room. Good, she said. Let them interpret. They will move against you if they think you are uncertain. They will move against me regardless, she replied. At least this way, I choose when they are wrong. Her advisor sighed, a quiet sound that suggested long familiarity with decisions he could not prevent. You are going to make my role significantly more difficult. That's why you're here, Ariel said with the faintest trace of humor. The chamber fell into a murmur as opposing factions began to argue over a matter that had, until moments ago, seemed straightforward. Ariel watched them, not with impatience, but with a kind of distant curiosity, as if observing a pattern that would eventually reveal itself. It usually did. Outside the chamber, the meridian stretched across multiple systems, its influence subtle but pervasive. Trade routes shifted with a word. Conflicts dissolved or intensified based on decisions made in rooms that most would never see. Ariel moved through it all with a quiet precision that unsettled even those who supported her. "She doesn't react," one council member whispered to another, unaware that the architecture of the chamber carried sound more efficiently than intended. "That's because she's already decided," the other replied. They were both wrong, though not entirely. Ariel did react, just not in ways that were visible. Her thoughts moved quickly, but her actions did not follow immediately. She preferred to let events reveal themselves, to allow others the comfort of believing they understood the direction of things before gently altering it. It was, she had discovered, far more effective than force. There were moments, however, when the weight of it all pressed inward, when the endless calculations of power and consequence threatened to narrow her world into something smaller than she could tolerate. On those nights, she would leave the central halls and walk alone along the outer platforms, where the stars remained indifferent to politics. Her guards protested, of course. "This is not advisable," one of them said, keeping a careful distance behind her. "Your presence is required in—" "My presence is required everywhere," Ariel interrupted calmly. "That is precisely why I am not there right now." The guard hesitated, then followed in silence, clearly uncertain whether he had just been dismissed or included. Ariel stepped to the edge of the platform, her gaze settling on a distant star that flickered faintly against the dark. It was not the same star she had once watched on that nameless station, but it reminded her of it in a way she could not entirely explain. Memory, she had learned, was not always logical. "You're thinking again," the guard said after a moment, as if the act itself were suspicious. "I do that occasionally," Ariel replied. "It complicates things." "Yes," she said softly. "It does." She did not explain further. There was no need. Somewhere in the quiet space between responsibilities and expectations, a fragment of that past conversation remained. It had not faded as she once assumed it would. Instead, it had settled into her thoughts with a kind of quiet persistence, neither demanding attention nor allowing itself to be forgotten. A promise made lightly. A meeting set in a time so distant it should have been irrelevant. And yet, as the years passed, it did not become irrelevant. It became precise. "Do you believe in probability?" her advisor asked her once during a rare moment of informal conversation. "I believe in outcomes," Ariel said. "Those are not always the same." "They are eventually," she replied. He studied her for a moment. "And this outcome you're considering," he said carefully, "is it one you intend to influence?" Ariel's gaze shifted slightly, though she did not turn. "No," she said. "Then why consider it at all?" She allowed herself the faintest smile, one that carried no explanation with it. "Because," she said, "it already exists." Her advisor frowned, clearly dissatisfied with that answer, but wise enough not to press further. Time continued, as it always did, indifferent to whether it was being observed. The meridian expanded, stabilized, adapted. Ariel became something more than she had been, not through a single defining moment, but through the steady accumulation of choices that left little room for doubt. And yet, in the quietest parts of her mind, there remained a fixed point, a place with no name, a conversation with no conclusion, a man who had spoken as if time were an inconvenience rather than a force. "You always seem like someone who would arrive eventually," she murmured once, recalling the shape of his words. The guard behind her shifted slightly. "Did you say something?" "No," Ariel replied, but she had. And somewhere, across distances measured not just in space but in years, the idea of that meeting remained exactly where it had been placed, unchanged by everything that had come after. Waiting, with a patience that felt almost deliberate. Seb did not mark the years. At least that was what he told himself every time the thought surfaced with inconvenient clarity. He did not count them, did not track them, did not occasionally calculate how many remained with the quiet precision of someone pretending not to care. He simply lived, moved, took contracts, lost interest in things at the exact moment they became predictable. Current trajectory will intersect a debris field in approximately 4 minutes, the ship's system said. Sev leaned slightly to the left, peering through the forward display as if the debris might wave politely before arriving. Can we avoid it? Yes, the system replied. Then I suggest we do that. Already in progress, the system said. You are welcome. Sev smirked faintly. You're developing personality. I am optimizing interaction efficiency. That's what personality is, Sev said. Just better excuses. The ship adjusted course, gliding past fragments of broken machinery that spun slowly in the dark. Some of the debris still carried faint power signatures, flickering like stubborn remnants of a system that refused to fully shut down. Salvage value? Sev asked. Minimal, the system replied. Also, stopping would delay your current contract. Sev considered that for a moment. And if I said I was feeling adventurous, I would note that your version of adventure usually involves avoidable complications. That sounds unfair, Sev said. Some of my complications were unavoidable. Statistically inaccurate, the system said. Sev let out a quiet laugh and settled back into his seat. The ship's hum filled the silence, steady and familiar. It was the kind of sound that became invisible over time, like background thoughts you stopped noticing unless something disrupted them. The years had shaped him, though not in ways that were immediately obvious. He had become more precise in his movements, more selective in his choices. The reckless edges had softened, replaced by something quieter, more deliberate. He still took risks, but now he understood their cost before stepping into them. It made him efficient. It also made him occasionally bored. You have declined 3 contracts in the past week, the system said, all of them within your capability range. They were predictable, Sev replied. They were profitable. Profit is predictable, Sev said. That's the problem. The system paused as if reconsidering its understanding of motivation. Would you prefer less predictable profit? I would prefer less predictable everything, Sev said. That is not an economically stable preference. Sev smiled faintly. Stability is overrated. The ship exited transit smoothly, stars snapping back into place like scattered points of reference. Ahead, a trade station drifted in quiet orbit around a gas giant, its lights forming a loose constellation of artificial order. Sev guided the ship toward the docking corridor, his movements automatic, practiced. As the station grew larger in the viewport, something about it caught his attention, not because it was unusual, but because it was familiar in a way that didn't quite resolve. Docking permissions granted, the system said. Try not to offend anyone important. I never do that on purpose, Sev replied. That is not reassuring. He docked without incident and stepped out into the station's main concourse. The air carried the usual mix of recycled oxygen and faintly questionable food sources. Traders moved through the space with practiced urgency, their conversations blending into a low, constant murmur. Sev walked without a clear destination, letting his steps follow the natural flow of the station. It was a habit he had developed over time. Move first, decide later. It worked surprisingly well, provided you didn't think too hard about it. At the far end of the concourse, an observation deck opened up, its wide glass panels offering a view of the gas giant below. Sev slowed slightly as he approached it, something in the arrangement of space tugging at his attention. It wasn't the same station. It couldn't be. And yet the shape of the room, the quiet curve of the seating, the way the light shifted across the glass, it echoed something he had not actively remembered in years. Your pace has decreased by approximately 12%, the system noted in his ear. I'm observing, Sev said. You are standing still. That's a form of observation. Sev stepped into the observation area, his gaze drifting across the seats, the scattered figures watching the slow swirl of the gas giant's storms. For a moment, nothing happened. It was just another station, another view, another pause in a life defined by movement. Then, without warning, the memory aligned. Not fully, not perfectly, but enough. A dying star instead of a gas giant. A quiet conversation instead of passing silence. A promise that had no reason to matter. Sev exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. That's inconvenient, he muttered. Inconvenience appears to be a recurring theme, the system replied. He almost laughed. You have no idea. Sev moved to one of the empty seats and sat down, leaning back as he looked out at the shifting clouds below. For a moment he allowed himself to do nothing. No calculations, no planning, no deliberate avoidance. Just observation. You are thinking again, the system said. I do that occasionally, Sev replied. It continues to complicate things. Yes, Sev said quietly. It does. The storm below twisted slowly, vast and indifferent. Sev watched it, his thoughts drifting in a way he usually avoided. 21 years. It was an absurd amount of time. Long enough for anything to change. Long enough for everything to change. She won't be there, he said, not entirely sure why he was saying it out loud. Probability of that outcome is high, the system replied. Sev nodded faintly. Exactly. He stood after a moment, the decision forming without effort. Movement again, forward again. That was how things worked. Behind him, the observation deck remained unchanged, holding its quiet space as if it had never been occupied at all. Sev didn't look back as he left, but the thought followed him anyway, subtle and persistent, like something that had already decided it wasn't going to be ignored. The realization did not arrive all at once. It began as a minor miscalculation, the kind Sev would normally correct without thinking. He was reviewing a navigation route, cross-checking system alignments with the quiet focus of someone who preferred machines to behave predictably when a date appeared where it should not have mattered. He stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. That's wrong, he said. It is correct, the system replied immediately. I checked twice. Sev leaned back slightly. I didn't ask you to check twice. I anticipated your doubt. That's unsettling. I aim to be thorough. Sev looked at the display again. The date remained exactly where it was, unchanged by his skepticism. He tapped the console once, as if that might encourage it to reconsider its position. Run it again, he said. I just said Run it again. There was a brief pause filled with the faint hum of processing. Recalculation complete, the system said. The result is identical. You are approaching a time marker that appears to have significance to you. Sev exhaled slowly. It doesn't. You have manually reviewed the same data point 4 times in the last 2 minutes. That's called being careful. That's called hesitation. Sev gave a short, quiet laugh. You're getting bold. I am adapting to your behavior. That's unfortunate for both of us. He stood up, stepping away from the console, as if physical distance might reduce the importance of what he had just seen. It didn't. 21 years. The number settled into his thoughts with an uncomfortable precision. Not approximate, not close enough, exact. That's inconvenient, he muttered. Inconvenience appears to increase in correlation with your awareness, the system replied. Sev rubbed his face with one hand. I don't need commentary right now. Would you prefer silence? Yes. There was a brief pause. I will simulate silence, the system said. Sev stared at the ceiling. That's not how silence works. It is the closest available approximation. Sev let out a breath that might have been a laugh. You're impossible. I am consistent. He moved to the viewport, looking out at the slow drift of distant stars. They were steady, indifferent, unaffected by anything as small as a promise made in passing. That was a joke, Sev said quietly. The system did not respond. He nodded to himself. Exactly. For a while he remained there, watching nothing in particular. The ship continued its quiet progression through space, systems functioning with the calm reliability he had come to depend on. Eventually, he turned back to the console. Show me the route to the station, he said. There was a pause, long enough to feel intentional. You have not visited that location in 21 years, the system said. I'm aware. You previously categorized it as inefficient to revisit. I'm revising that category. On what basis? Sev considered the question for a moment. Curiosity, he said. That is not a quantifiable metric. It doesn't need to be. The system processed that, then displayed a projected route. The The station appeared as a small, distant marker along the edge of mapped space, its position unchanged despite everything else that had shifted around it. Estimated travel time will place you within proximity of the station, slightly behind your intended arrival marker, the system said. Sev frowned. Define slightly. Approximately 10 minutes. He stared at the display. You're joking. I do not joke. Can we adjust? Possible, but it would require increasing engine strain beyond recommended thresholds. Sev thought about that. How far beyond? Enough to make me uncomfortable. That's not a unit of measurement. It is for me. Sev smiled faintly. Then we'll keep it within your comfort zone. Thank you, the system said, with what almost sounded like relief. Sev leaned back, folding his arms as he studied the route. 10 minutes late, he murmured. Statistically insignificant, the system offered. Not in this case. Why? Sev hesitated, then shook his head slightly. No reason. The system did not press further. Preparation took less time than Sev expected. There were no elaborate arrangements to make, no complex negotiations to finalize. Just a course to follow and a decision he had already made, whether he admitted it or not. As the ship entered transit, the familiar distortion enveloped them, stars stretching into something unrecognizable. You are choosing to proceed with this action despite acknowledging its low probability of meaningful outcome, the system said. Sev closed his eyes briefly. Yes. Would you like me to adjust expectations accordingly? That sounds dangerously close to optimism, Sev said. It is closer to realism. Sev smiled faintly. Then leave it as it is. The hum of the engines deepened slightly as they accelerated, the ship moving with quiet determination through the artificial geometry of faster-than-light travel. For the first time in a long while, Sev was not moving towards something defined by necessity or obligation. He was moving toward a question. She won't be there, he said again. The words softer now, less certain. The system remained silent. Sev exhaled slowly, opening his eyes to the shifting patterns of transit. Yeah, he added after a moment. Probably not. But the route remained set, and the distance for once felt measurable in something other than space. The station appeared slowly, almost reluctantly, as if it had not expected to be found again. Sev leaned forward slightly in his seat, watching as the familiar ring-shaped structure resolved from a distant blur into something unmistakably real. It hadn't changed. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Stations evolved, upgraded, rebranded themselves with increasingly confident names. This one remained exactly as it had been. Quiet, unclaimed, indifferent. That's unsettling, Sev muttered. Stability is generally considered a positive trait, the system replied. Not when everything else has moved on, Sev said. Perhaps everything else is overcompensating. Sev allowed himself a faint smile. That's surprisingly philosophical. I am adapting. You keep saying that like it's reassuring. It is not intended to be. The docking sequence initiated automatically, the station granting access without question. No identity verification beyond the most basic scan. No inquiry into purpose. It was the kind of place that assumed if you had arrived, you probably had a reason, and if you didn't, that was your problem. Sev stood as the ship settled into place, adjusting his jacket with a motion that was more habit than necessity. He paused for a moment before heading toward the exit. You are hesitating, the system said. I'm considering, Sev replied. You have been considering for approximately 18 seconds. That's not long. For you, it is statistically significant. Sev exhaled slowly. I'm going. I will remain here, the system said, unless you would like me to accompany you, which I strongly advise against, as I do not possess legs. That would complicate things, Sev agreed. He stepped out of the ship and into the station's corridor, the air greeting him with that same faintly artificial scent he remembered. The lighting was unchanged, the hum of distant systems steady and familiar. It was like walking into a memory that had been preserved with unsettling accuracy. Time check, Sev said quietly. You are 10 minutes behind the calculated alignment of your previous statement, the system replied through his earpiece. Sev nodded once. Of course I am. He moved through the concourse at a measured pace, neither rushing nor delaying, Travelers passed him without interest, their lives intersecting with his only briefly before continuing in separate directions. It was the same as it had always been, temporary, detached. The observation deck was where he remembered it. That, more than anything else, made him slow down. The entrance curved open with a soft, mechanical whisper, revealing the wide glass panels beyond. The dying star was still there, though dimmer now, its light stretched thinner across the void. It had not finished its collapse. Of course it hadn't. Dramatic, Sev murmured. I recall you using that term previously, the system said. I stand by it. He stepped inside. For a moment he saw nothing. Just the seats, the quiet space, the distant light of a star that refused to conclude its performance. Sev let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. There it is, he said softly. Empty. Probability aligns with expectation, the system replied. Sev nodded faintly. Exactly. He took a few steps forward, his gaze drifting across the observation deck, not really searching, just confirming. It was what he had expected, what he had told himself would be true. And then, at the far end of the curved glass, someone stood, still, unmoving, exactly where they had been 21 years ago. Sev stopped. For a moment his mind refused to process what he was seeing, as if the image in front of him did not match any available category. Then it did. Her. She stood with the same quiet composure, her posture unchanged, her presence somehow both familiar and entirely new. There was no crown, no visible symbol of authority, nothing to indicate that she was anything other than a solitary figure watching a dying star. But Sev knew. System, he said quietly without looking away. Am I hallucinating? There was a brief pause. No, the system replied. Your visual input appears consistent with external reality. That's unfortunate, Sev said. I can simulate hallucination if you prefer. No, this is... Fine, Sev said. He remained where he was, completely still, as if any movement might disrupt the moment and cause it to collapse into something more manageable. 21 years. He felt it all at once, not as a sequence of events, but as a weight, a distance that had somehow been crossed without his awareness. She's actually here, he said. That appears to be the case. Sev let out a quiet breath, something between a laugh and disbelief. That's statistically improbable, yet currently observable. He considered turning around. The thought came and went quickly, dismissed almost as soon as it formed. It would have been easier, simpler. He could leave, return to his ship, continue moving as if this had never happened. But she was there, and she had been there, waiting. Sev shook his head slightly, a faint smile forming despite himself. Of course she is, he murmured. You sound unsurprised, the system noted. I'm very surprised, Sev said. I'm just trying not to show it. That is ineffective. Your heart rate has increased. Let's keep that between us. Noted. Sev took a step forward, then another. Each movement felt deliberate, measured, as if he were approaching something that required careful handling. She had not turned yet. She had not seen him. For a brief moment, Sev found himself observing her the way he had before, without context, without expectation. Just a presence at the edge of something vast. Then he exhaled, the hesitation breaking, and he walked toward her. She noticed him when he was close enough that turning away would have required intention. Her head tilted slightly, not in surprise but in recognition, like someone confirming something they had already decided was true. For a moment neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt less like an absence, and more like something carefully preserved. Sev stopped a few steps away. I was going to pretend I arrived exactly on time, he said, his voice steady despite everything else. But I feel like you'd know I was lying. Her lips curved into that same quiet smile he remembered, unchanged by the passage of years. You are 10 minutes late, Sev blinked. You kept track? I arrived 20 minutes early, she replied calmly. It seemed reasonable to expect a delay. He let out a short breath that almost turned into a laugh. That's unfairly accurate. You have not changed as much as you think, she said. That's concerning, Sev replied. I was hoping for at least minor improvements. She studied him for a moment. her gaze steady but not distant. There are changes, she said. You just hide them better. Sev considered that, then nodded slightly. That sounds like something I would do. They stood there for a moment longer, the weight of 21 years settling into something that didn't feel heavy anymore. Just present. You came, Sev said finally, as if he still needed to confirm it. I said I would, she replied. You didn't say it like it was optional. It wasn't. Sev glanced briefly toward the dying star beyond the glass. It flickered faintly, still refusing to finish what it had started decades ago. You know, I spent a long time convincing myself you wouldn't be here. And yet you came, she said. Curiosity, Sev replied automatically. Ariel's expression softened slightly, as if she recognized the word for what it was. A deflection that had survived 21 years out of habit more than necessity. You are still using that explanation, she said. It's a reliable one. It is incomplete, Sev smiled faintly. Most reliable things are. There was a subtle shift in the air around them then. Not something visible, but something felt. A pair of figures at the edge of the observation deck adjusted their position slightly, their attention not quite focused on Sev, but not entirely elsewhere either. Sev noticed. He glanced past her briefly, then back. You didn't come alone. No, Ariel said. That's new. It is necessary. Sev nodded once, the realization settling into place. You're important now, he said. Ariel tilted her head slightly. I was always important? Fair, Sev admitted, but now it comes with extra people. They worry, she said simply. Do you? Sev asked. She considered that, her gaze shifting briefly toward the star before returning to him. Not in the same way. Sev leaned back slightly, folding his arms. I should have asked your name, he said. 21 years ago. You chose not to, she replied. I thought it would make it easier. Did it? Sev let out a quiet breath. No, he said. Ariel's smile returned, faint but certain. My name is Ariel. Sev nodded slowly. Sev, he said, in case that part was also missing. It was not, she said. That made him pause. You remembered? I do not forget things that matter. Sev looked at her for a moment, something unspoken passing through his expression before it settled into something quieter, more certain. That's inconvenient, he said softly. Ariel almost laughed. The tension between them shifted then, easing into something more familiar, as if the years between had been acknowledged and then set aside. Not erased, but no longer in control. You've been busy, Sev said, gesturing vaguely toward the unseen systems beyond the station. Yes, Ariel replied. Running things, making decisions, probably not trusting navigation AIs that claim emotional investment. They sound unreliable. They are, Sev confirmed. Very confident, though. I have met similar individuals, Ariel said. Sev smiled. That doesn't surprise me. They fell into conversation again, not as strangers, but not entirely as something defined either. The same ease returned, threaded now with a deeper understanding neither of them needed to explain. At some point, Sev realized he wasn't thinking about leaving. That was new. You're staying longer this time, Ariel said, as if reading the shift before he fully understood it himself. Sev hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, he said. I think I am. Why? She asked, not challenging, just curious. Sev glanced at the star again, then back at her. Because I spent 21 years moving forward, he said, and I'm starting to think I might have been circling the same point. Ariel studied him, her expression steady. And now? Now I'm here, Sev said simply. There was no dramatic resolution, no sudden transformation. Just a quiet alignment of something that had been drifting for a long time. Ariel nodded once, as if that was enough. Behind them, the station continued its quiet existence, indifferent to the significance of the moment. The star beyond the glass flickered again, still unresolved, still ongoing. Sev glanced at it, then shook his head slightly. You know, he said, I think that thing is just refusing to end out of spite. Or patience, Ariel said. Sev considered that. I'm not sure which is worse. Perhaps they are the same, she replied. He smiled faintly. That sounds like something I'll spend another 21 years thinking about. Ariel's gaze held his, calm and certain. You will not need that long. Sev raised an eyebrow. That confident? Yes, she said. Sev let out a quiet breath, something lighter than before. Good, Ian, he said, because I was running out of excuses. The two of them stood there side by side, not as they had been, but not entirely different either. The distance between past and present had closed without force, without urgency. And for the first time in a long while, Sev didn't feel the need to move.